Hey guys, Zane here. Today we're going to be going over the Hu Tao leaks in their entirety and how I think you're going to be building her. So we'll start off with her basic attacks. There's actually nothing really special here. These percentages are average, a bit above. They're like for a 5-star, these are nothing special. And the reason for that is her next ability. This is Guide to the Afterlife. This is where things start getting like, oh, that I see. So whenever she uses this ability, she's going to enter Paramita Falpio state, which is hard to say. But what this does is it increases Hu Tao's attack based on her max HP. So the more HP you have, the more attack you are going to get. And it lets you go up to 400% of your base attack. So you can get your attack up to 400% what it was by building HP on her. And that's not all. All of her damage that she's doing when she goes into this state, like all this damage over here, this is all going to be pyro damage, kind of like Child. And just like Child as well, the pyro damage can't be overridden by anything. If you put a Chongyun down, he's not going to, its damage is going to switch to cryo, it's going to stay fire. And third, kind of like, oh my goodness, she has a bleed effect. Technically it's a fire tick, but it's called Blood Blossom, so I can only infer that it's a bleed. And that means they will take pyro damage every 4 seconds, and it's considered like an elemental skill damage, which means that you can make elemental reactions off of it. If you apply a bleed to all of them, and, I don't know, Official strikes it with Electric, then it'll make an elemental reaction, and that applies every 4 seconds. Now, you can only have one bleed on you at a time, but Hu Tao can refresh it. So let's say if, the bleed's got 2 seconds left, then if Hu Tao hits someone with I believe it's a dash that she has to do. Yeah, charged attacks. Her animations in the state change, and her charged attack turns into like a dash through people, and that's what will apply this bleed. So let's say they got 2 seconds left on their bleed. She can dash through them, and it'll go all the way back up to 8 seconds, which is, we can see down here, the duration at all ranks. Now, this also increases her resistance to interruption. And what that means is basically all those enemies that knock you over, or like, let's say you're like an archer and you're charging up an arrow, and you get hit, and it interrupts you, you get like much higher resistances towards that. So it's got to be more damage, bigger effects. Now, keep in mind this bleed, because this is going to come into effect a little bit later. The bleed goes away, not when she switches off. So you can apply this bleed, this fire damage, and then switch off, and the bleed will stay. However, this effect itself ends when Hu Tao leaves the battlefield. So if you switch off, other people aren't going to get their attack increased by the HP. It's just going to be her, which leads me to believe she is definitely going to be a DPS. Moving on, we have Spirit Soother. Now, this is her ultimate, and it is very similar to, think Child's ultimate. It's like a big AoE, does pyro damage around you. The difference is, when it hits someone, it is going to restore HP. So you can see at rank 1, it'll restore 8% of your HP, and at level 15, the max, it'll restore 17%. Now, the interesting thing about that is that's per person hit. So you can hit someone 5 times, which means if you hit someone for 8.3% like match HP restore 5 times, you're going to heal 40% off of this ability, which is a lot. The interesting thing, too, though, is if Hu Tao's HP is below or equal 50% when she hits someone, the damage goes up, and the HP you're getting back goes up. So you can see it's going up about roughly 3% HP increase, and that would be about 25% extra damage on her elemental skill. Gotta do the math on the fly. Yeah, almost exactly 25% increased by being on low HP. And that is what makes her so good with the new weapon out, the new spear. What that spear does is the same exact thing. When your DPS drops below 50%, they're going to do extra damage, which is perfect. It's quite literally made for her. That is her weapon. So that's all of her abilities. You can see for her upgrade material, she's going to be taking, obviously, I believe that's Guide to Growth and just Whoopee Flower Nectar. The passive talents, though, this is kind of where it gets interesting again. We leave this boring garbage back. Passive talents. She has a very interesting starting passive, and which is when she cooks a dish perfectly, she gets an 18% chance to make a suspicious dish of the same type. Now, we don't know what that means yet, but I assume it's going to be like a little kind of quirk, not necessarily a big gameplay mechanic, cuz if it is, then I think a lot of people who aren't going for Hu Tao are going to be a little salty if Hu Tao can also make, I don't know, the best food in the game or like a new type of food. So I seriously doubt that this is anything big, more just like a fun little, like, you get extra food kind of thing. But who knows? Now, this is kind of where we get, like, DPS increases. And this is when her E ends, her Guide to the Afterlife, when it ends, she is going to give everyone in her party, but besides herself, so the other three, like supports or maybe off DPS, whatever you're running, are going to get their crit rate up by 12%. So that's nothing huge, but basically it's going to mean once she's done her damage and she's done, you'll switch out, and whoever you switch out to do to like attack, their crit rate's going to go up. Nothing major, just kind of quality of life. And this is kind of the staple of Hu Tao. When her HP is less than 50%, her pyro damage goes up by 33%. So again, you're probably seeing a theme here. The more health she's missing, the more damage she does, and that is also going to come into play in her constellations. Speaking of constellations, let's kind of go over them. Now, obviously, if you're a free-to-play player, you're probably never going to get these, I'm going to be honest with you, mate. But if you're whaling it up, then there's some good ones. Let me put it like that. But let's start off with the C1, which is nothing really special. When she's in her E, which is what's turning her HP into attack, her charge attacks, what's applying her bleed, is not going to consume stamina, so you can just kind of dash around to your heart's content, which is pretty cool. I don't know how good that is in compared to other C1s. I mean, Venti's C1 is pretty bad, but there are some really good C1 5-stars, and I wouldn't really say this holds up. It's not terrible, but it's nothing special. C2 is, again, where things start ramping up. And this basically means that her Blood Blossom, her bleed, or I guess set on fire, if you will, also increases by her max HP. However, it is 10%. That is a lot. Let's say you have 30,000 like HP, which is fairly reasonable to have if you're going like for a full like HP build. Maybe 20,000, 25,000 is closer. That is 2,500 damage without considering reactions from a bleed that you are never ever having to worry about. It also makes her ultimate apply that bleed, so it's going to be on everyone with that basically. C3 is very simple. It just increases your ability level. All characters have something like that. C4, again, C2 was like, okay, this is pretty good. C4 is where it's like, oh, okay, we're really giving her this? Is this really needed? And that is Garden of Eternal Rest. And upon defeating an enemy that had like a bleed on them, all allies, including like if you're in co-op, like your people near you, are going to get their crit rate increased by another 12%. These two stack, which means she's giving people 24% crit rate. That means if you had no other crit, you would still crit 1 in 4 times. I understand that doesn't seem like a lot, but crit artifacts, a level 20 crit artifact gives you 30%. So she is applying almost an artifact's worth of crit rate just through these passives, which is insane, especially if you're in a co-op where you're with other DPSs. This is really, really good, and I cannot overstate that. It's not even the craziest thing she has, though. C5, obviously, it's very simple. You just level up Spirit Soother again. Nothing too crazy. Her final, though, she got Barbara passive, but a lot better. So whenever she drops below 25%, or when she's gonna die, she won't. Instead, she says no you, and for 10 seconds, all of her resistances go up by 2%. Her crit rate is just set to 100%, and she cannot be interrupt. Like I was saying earlier, like you get like shot by an archer or something, it will not interrupt you. And this happens once every 60 seconds. That means in a Spiral Abyss, let's say, for 3 stars, you're going to be going for like 2 minutes per side. You can use this twice per encounter. I cannot stress how insane that is. Obviously, it's C6, so it deserves to be insane, but goodness gracious. Hu Tao is very much going to be, if not one of the best DPSs, she is certainly going to be up there, especially if you're kind of wailing on her and you're getting her to max Constellation. Now, the rest of the things on this site are basically just her voice lines, and I suggest you give them a read. And so I will be sending this link, not sending this link, I'll be putting this link in the description, as well as a video to her animations. I can't show that on camera because MiHoYo has been taking down a lot of videos with that shown, and I would prefer to not have that happen to me, like I've been saying. So that'll just be in the description. There'll be a link down there. But before you go, let's talk about what artifact she's going to run. Of course, it's probably no surprise that she's going to be running the Pyro set, which, you know, increases her pyro damage and elemental reaction damage. But because of how her scaling works, she is probably going to be scaling into HP. Now, that doesn't mean just go for HP. If we kind of think about this, let's scroll up to her ratios. She's got 5 crit rate, and her critical damage is 88%. This is a really good crit damage scaling, but you're still going to need crit rate. So you're going to probably want to go maybe 1 crit damage, all the crit rate you can get, and then HP. I don't think that she's going to get a pyro damage artifact, because she's already getting pyro damage from her HP. People are going to have to obviously like calculate if it's more efficient to get 40% increased pyro damage or to get HP for that pyro damage, and that'll be calculated out eventually. But my guess is definitely going to be building HP instead of that pyro damage. But we'll see. So the stats to avoid are just going to be attack percent up. You're not really going to want elemental mastery. Obviously, you don't want defense. You want HP. But yeah. So that's kind of how you're going to want to level up her artifacts. For people who are going to be grinding for her, I'll leave a link to the map in the description, and you can see where to find these flowers right here. Obviously, you get this from the new boss. And yeah, I'm going to go ahead and leave it there. So I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope this was helpful. And if it was, you know, like, subscribe, all those things that everyone tells you to do that you really should. So yeah, have a nice day, y'all. Bye-bye.